Chapter 30:24. She was very tired now and didn't want to be entangled with him anymore. I'm going abroad tomorrow, and I'll be back in about half a month. Lan Yu, I hope you can make a decision in this half a month. After she finished showering, she wiped her body with a dry towel and said lightly. Lan Yu frowned. You're going abroad again? I'm a model. Isn't it normal to go abroad? Qin Chen's voice was indifferent. Lan Yu said without thinking, turn down this job and I'll pay you double. Her hands slowed down and she looked up at him. Look, you're here again. She ignored him, put on her bathrobe and walked out. She didn't avoid him from the beginning to the end. Just like he said, they were husband and wife, so there was no need to hide. Lan Yu stayed in the bathroom and took a cold shower. He needed to calm down and think about his relationship with Qin Chen. She said that he loved her? Was it so obvious? He took a shower for 10 minutes and walked back to the master bedroom with a touch of coolness. Qin Chen had changed the messy bedsheets, and it was quite clean. She was leaning against the headboard and reading a fashion magazine. Lan Yu liked this habit, but he wasn't used to her reading it. She used to read foreign English medical magazines, and there were some in his villa. This kind of Qin Chen might be more in line with men's preferences, but he wasn't used to it, and he was not satisfied. He was even angry. She forgot everything and confidently left him alone in the past. She was angry about what he did to her just now, but she didn't take it to heart because she didn't care about him. Lan Yu smiled and laughed at himself. He leaned against her and lit a cigarette. He said lightly, will you take Xiao Rongyu with you? Oh, no, my mom will take him. Qin Chen said lightly. Lan Yu probably wanted to ease the relationship, so he looked at her and said, I can take him for you. Qin Chen seemed to be stunned. Oh, no, he's going to school soon. It's better for him to relax at home. Home? Lan Yu was stunned for a moment before he realized that she didn't seem to treat this place as her home, but as a temporary place to stay. His contract with her was only for a short period of 2 to 3 years, and she gladly accepted. He also realized that she had never bought anything here. She only treated this place as a hotel. He suddenly looked at her and said, Qin Chen, this is the most comprehensive hotel you've ever stayed in, right? A servant, a man for you to satisfy. His words were full of thorns. Qin Chen naturally wouldn't let him have it easy. He sneered, Mr. Lan, what does this place mean to you? A family? The women here are all temporary. How much better are they compared to the one-off women in the hotel? She looked impatient. Please don't do shameless things while pretending to be deeply in love with me, okay? That will make me. She tilted her head and said to him very rationally, I feel a little nauseous. Understand? Lan Yu's face darkened. He immediately lifted the quilt, and before he left, he bent down in front of her and raised his hand. Is there a clause in our contract that allows domestic violence? Qin Chen looked at him. There was coldness in Lan Yu's eyes. He punched at the head of the bed above her head. But Qin Chen caught it. He caught it very quickly. Lan Yu was stunned. Qin Chen was also stunned. Chapter 30:25. She was stunned for a long time before she let go of him. Boring. Then, let's do something to talk about. He changed his mind. She was his wife. Even if it was temporary, she was still his wife. Why should he endure it? He could have sex with her whenever he wanted. When he tore off her bathrobe savagely, Qin Chen was furious. She picked up a magazine and hit his head. Let go of me, bastard. But he didn't care about it, so he kissed her even harder and more savagely. They had clearly done it many times tonight, but he could still make it look like he was raping her. Qin Chen tried her best to stop him, but she couldn't. He still succeeded with brute force. He was hot. He bit her earlobe that was stained with blood. You clearly liked it just now, but you pretended to say otherwise. Then you drugged me. Qin Chen turned her face to the side. She clenched her fists and bit them in her mouth to prevent herself from making shameful sounds. Lan Yu chuckled and kissed her chin hard. She immediately screamed. Now, are you awake? He said shamelessly. Then, he deliberately forced her to make shameful sounds. Their love affair wasn't just after they reunited. They had had countless nights in the past. He couldn't be more familiar with her body. Qin bit her lips and turned her face away. She didn't want to look at him, but the passion burning in her blood made her abandon her armor. She became unlike herself. For the first time, she knew that she could be so devoted to this kind of thing without love. Finally, everything calmed down. She didn't make a sound, and neither did he. After a long time, Lonnie reached out and touched his face. It hurt. He walked to the bathroom to take a look. He couldn't look anymore. From his cheek to his neck, there were a few long scratches. It was obvious that they were made by a woman. He stretched his head and looked at the woman who was lying on the bed. He snorted. "Are you a cat?" Qin couldn't be bothered with him. After she took some paper towels and cleaned up, she was so tired that she fell asleep. Damn it. Didn't she come back after a busy day to be a comfortable mistress? After serving him for so long, he didn't even have a single good word to say. Before she fell asleep, she thought to herself that scratching him like this was pretty good. She probably wouldn't be able to go out for half a month. She didn't know why, but she also began to worry about being a rich lady. But it wouldn't be strange if she scratched him. She felt a little happy. So when Lanyu came out of the bathroom and saw her sleeping face, the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. It was her smile that soothed his unwillingness. He sat on the edge of the bed and reached out to gently touch her face. He thought that when she was with him, it wasn't as unbearable and uncomfortable as she said. She always said one thing and meant another. He felt a little lost. The revenge he spoke of had all turned into revenge against himself. She was doing very well. She could sleep so happily even after being caressed by him. He thought about it and agreed. He was handsome and rich. What was there for her to be dissatisfied with? In her heart, he was most likely a free duck. However, President Lon, you know the truth. He couldn't accept it. He reached out to hold her chin and pressed his face against her. Qin couldn't stand it. She wasn't a good-tempered person to begin with. After waking up, she sat up. Lanyu, you're so annoying. Good. You've succeeded in taking revenge on me. She rolled up the quilt and wanted to change rooms, but he stopped her from leaving. Chapter 30-26. He didn't know what was wrong with him, but he had a feeling that he wanted to talk to her. But she didn't want to talk to him. As before, it was always his one-man show. Lanyu dragged her back and said in a hoarse voice, "Go to sleep." Qin came back, lay down, and fell asleep again. But after a while, she suddenly woke up. She opened her eyes and saw Lanyu sitting by the bed, looking at her quietly. Probably because she was asleep, her expression was very soft, and her voice was a little lazy, which was actually a little cute. "Lanyu, aren't you going to sleep in the guest room?" she said as she moved her face on his lap and said in a daze, "Let's argue tomorrow, okay? I'm really sleepy." She asked him to sleep in the guest room while resting her head on his lap. After sleeping for 2 minutes, she opened her eyes again and said in a nasal voice, "It's really not worth it for you to marry me. Lu Wei is what successful men like you need the most. She's obedient, gentle, and beautiful." She smiled and buried her face in his lap. "If you ask her to go east, she will never go west." As she said that, she laughed herself. And Lanyu held his breath. This was her softest moment, and he hadn't seen it for a long time. Qin said childishly, "She will also cooperate with all kinds of perverted requests in bed. She probably won't even dare to say that you are fooling around outside." Lanyu's voice was hoarse. "What you said is good, but that's not what I want." Qin smiled. "Then what is it that you want?" Her fingers were messy and touched the wound on his face. "This is what you want. Then I'll try harder next time," she said, her voice fading. Lanyu wanted her to talk again, but this time she was really asleep. He was a little helpless, but he felt more pity. He reached out and touched her face gently, moving her to the pillow. People who were going to sleep in the guest room were always reluctant to leave because she was so cute and soft. He no longer had any thoughts of revenge in his heart. He just wanted to hug her. Finally, they lay down together. He was counting the seconds. Once again, she was in his arms. It was Qin, also known as Mrs. Lon. It was his fault, he thought. He should not have called her Madame Roan.
She was his wife now.
He vaguely decided that maybe he should let go of the past and let her fall in love with him. With her amnesia, they could start over. Lanyu smiled. Early morning. When Chen woke up, he saw an enlarged, handsome face. At this time, it was somewhat distorted, but also showed his great joy. She couldn't help biting her lower lip. Aren't you tired? He had done it many times last night. She felt a little tired of this kind of thing if it happened too often. It was very comfortable, but he just wanted to lie down and not move. As for Mr. Lon, it was obvious that he could perform a one-man show from beginning to end, as long as she did not resist and was obedient. He closed his eyes and looked like he was enjoying it very much. After all, Chen was also made of flesh and blood. She could not feel anything when such a handsome man did this to her. She comforted herself again. Just treat it as a free duck. But this duck was still quite expensive, and one duck was eaten 4 times. Chen was about to vomit. She couldn't help but resist. Let go, I'm flying to Milan today. I've checked. Your flight is in the afternoon. Accompany me for the whole morning. He closed his eyes and said casually. Chen was about to explode. Chapter 30:27. In the end, he still forced her to do 2 rounds. When Chen finished taking a shower and eating, there was still an hour and a half left before the flight. I'll drive you, Lanyu said calmly. Chen pursed his lips and smiled faintly. Thank you, Mr. Lon. He looked at her and said meaningfully, It's my pleasure. After all, I'm the one who caused the trouble, aren't I? Chen got up and took the luggage. Do you have to act like a hooligan with a serious face? He smiled faintly and didn't say much. Then he took the luggage from her hand and said calmly, Let me do it. Chen looked at him. I'll drive myself and park at the airport. Mrs. Lon, you're married. Marriage means mutual use. He continued to act like a hooligan with a serious face. Chen couldn't do anything about him. So she got in the car. Lanyu put the luggage in the front seat and started the car. He drove fast but steadily and arrived at the airport an hour later. The check-in was just in time, so it was a close call. Chen pursed his lips and raised the ticket. Thank you. I'm going to go through the security check. Lanyu stared at her for a long time before he whispered, Wait a minute. When she wasn't paying attention, she was pulled into his arms. His tall body blocked other people's view. He leaned forward and kissed her. Chen was stunned. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Although they had done it many times, she felt that such a kiss full of longing was really not suitable for them. However, Lanyu seemed to be a little engrossed in the kiss, so she endured it. 5 minutes later, she pushed him. It's almost time to board. Lanyu was pushed away. His slightly red face was embarrassed. He glared at her, then took her hand and personally sent her to the security check. He became tender and affectionate. Call me after you land safely. Chen coughed lightly. Lanyu, are you okay? His face instantly darkened. Of course, there's no problem. Damn it. She was looking at him as if he was a lunatic. Was he such a scumbag? Chen looked at him and didn't say anything else. He just walked over to the security check. Lanyu put his hand in his pocket and suddenly dialed her number. It made Chen a little embarrassed. Her phone was placed aside, but she still picked up the phone. Lanyu, are you done? Lanyu's gaze was calm. Oh, I just wanted to tell you that I'll be going to New York for a business trip in 3 days. Can you tell me which hotel you're staying at? Chen thought about it and decided to tell him.
GM.
I'll book you a presidential suite at the Grand Hyatt, he decided decisively. Chen wanted to object, but he had already hung up. And she didn't know how autocratic he was until she got off the plane. He arranged for the pickup staff to take her directly to the hotel to register. It was called a presidential suite, but it was full of Lanyu scent. It should be his exclusive place to stay in New York, and it was usually not open to the public. There was even a coat of his on the big bed in the master bedroom, and a cigarette box of his favorite brand was on the bedside table. The waiter helped her put down her luggage and said respectfully, Mrs. Lon, call the front desk if you need anything. Qin Chen nodded, tipped the waiter, and closed the door. She was a little tired and just wanted to have a good rest. She picked up the jacket and threw it on the sofa. Without even taking a shower, she lay down. Chapter 30:28. When she took a shower, she realized that everything in the room wasn't for the hotel, but for Lan Yu's private use. While brushing her teeth, Qin Chen suddenly thought of something. She searched every corner of the room, but couldn't find a single model. "He's really meditating," she murmured as she continued brushing her teeth. She didn't know why, but she felt better. After all, she didn't want to share the same husband, even if they didn't have feelings for each other. Qin Chen pursed his lips and looked at himself in the mirror. He stuck out his tongue in a mischievous manner. She started work the next day. This time, she was going to shoot for the Asian cover of a famous fashion magazine. She hadn't expected to meet Lu Wei, and it would be a double cover. While Qin Chen was putting on makeup, she heard a sound from outside. It was Lu Wei's slightly arrogant voice. "I won't do it with Qin Chen. I won't be there if she's there." Lu Wei was so confident because she was ranked 5th in the global supermodel rankings, while Qin Chen was only 10th. For this cover shoot, her endorsement fee was 2 of Qin Chen's films, which was enough to prove that the higher-ups attached importance to her. As for Lu Wei, she placed a lot of importance on the cover this time. This cover had directly confirmed her position as Asia's #1 model. But she didn't know that Qin Chen was going to do it with her. How could she be willing to shoot with Qin Chen and let Qin Chen steal her limelight? Yes, Lu Wei knew that she wouldn't necessarily lose in terms of popularity, but in terms of ability, she couldn't beat Qin Chen. Her unreasonable request made the editor-in-chief of ZA very embarrassed and angry. It was normal for supermodels and celebrities to act like they were big shots, but they also had to recognize their own status. Qin Chen was a new star, and his future was predicted to be even further than Lu Wei's. Lu Wei was just a supermodel, so she wasn't that good at endorsing, but Qin Chen was different. Qin Chen would be a dark horse in the East, appearing out of nowhere and sweeping the world, leading the trend. But the editor-in-chief also knew that Lu Wei had a good relationship with the higher-ups, and she was so determined that things were a bit difficult. Because they couldn't afford to offend Qin Chen. Qin Chen's background was not weak. She was the owner of the largest shares of Rhone Biology in France, and the Qin family owned the largest King entertainment company in Asia. Adding all of these together, any one of them was deeper than her friendship with Lu Wei. But the higher the position, the more important the editor-in-chief didn't dare to step on it. Then she found an excuse to postpone the shoot another day. Of course, Lu Wei did some exercise, but the result wasn't ideal. When he walked out of the dressing room, Qin Chen and Lu Wei came face to face. There were 4 bodyguards standing behind Lu Wei, fully embodying the grandeur that a supermodel should have. She walked forward and looked at Qin Chen. "Don't even think about appearing in ZA magazine with me." Beside Qin Chen was a small assistant. She smiled lightly. "Actually, I only thought of it as a job and didn't really want to do it. However, Miss Lu didn't want me to do it, so I insisted on doing it." Lu Wei's face darkened. Qin Chen added another infuriating sentence. "Just like Lan Yu. I didn't want to go there in the past, but the more Miss Lu doesn't want to, the more willing she is." After Qin Chen said that, his lips curled into a cold smile. Lu Wei was furious. No one, at least in the industry, had ever dared to speak to her like that. Chapter 30:29. "What is it?" Qin Chen sneered. "Lu Wei, I told you long ago that you should keep what's yours. If it's not yours, there's no point in forcing it." Although she, Qin Chen, had never competed in the industry and was very easygoing. But since her identity had been exposed, she couldn't do too badly and embarrass the Qin family. Qin Chen smiled faintly and was about to leave. "You're not allowed to leave." Lu Wei took a step forward, relying on her advantage. Qin Chen stood still. "Lu Wei, even if there were 10 of you who dared to touch a hair of mine, you would immediately disappear from this industry. Do you believe me?" Lu Wei bit her lip. She didn't believe it, but she was afraid. After all, King Entertainment controlled most of the domestic media. No matter how popular and awesome you were overseas, once the domestic mainstream media banned you, there would be nothing left. After all, modeling was a youth's livelihood. She still wanted to be in the domestic entertainment industry in the future and do variety shows. The person she couldn't afford to offend the most was Qin Mo, and Qin Mo was Qin Chen's brother. She couldn't do it openly, so she could only do it in the dark, to make Qin Chen suffer in silence. Lu Wei left. Qin Chen watched her back for a long time. Her assistant, Little Red, said indignantly, "She really thinks she's something. She's a big sister, but she only made it to the rankings once. That's impressive. She naturally has her own methods." Qin Chen flipped her long brown curly hair. "Let's not shoot anymore. I'll take a break for the next 2 days. I'll treat you to Mexican chicken later." Little Red cried, "I heard that you're staying in the Grand Hyatt Hotel's presidential suite. Aren't you going to take me to the Western restaurant there?" Qin Chen put on an expression of disbelief. Little Red said excitedly, "Sister Qin, you're so rich."
Come on.
Qin Chen carried her into the elevator, in a good mood. However, Sister Quan quickly called back. She was furious. "That Lu Wei is too insensible, isn't she? How dare they make such a request? No, I will call the higher-ups of ZA and demand an explanation. Are we that easy to bully?" Qin Chen's voice was very slow. "Sister Quan, isn't it better if they break the contract?" She didn't have to film any films and could still spend 10 million yuan. When Sister Quan heard that, she laughed and scolded, "I really can't do anything about you." Qin Chen leaned against the elevator and said slowly, "Just let Lu Wei jump. I won't be the one with a bad reputation in the end." Sister Quan was exasperated. "You just want to relax. Do you know how much traffic ZA has? It's worth more than 10 shows for you." Qin Chen's smile grew even lazier. "Actually, when I look at Lu Wei's face, it's quite disgusting." Sister Quan was one of the few people who knew that Qin Chen was married, so she smiled unkindly. "Do you mind that your husband might have slept with Lu Wei?" Qin Chen smiled. "I don't think so. Look at Lan Yu and Lu Wei. They both look like they owe them 2 million yuan. No matter how angry Sister Quan was, her anger dissipated. Anyway, Qin Chen was right. They had already gotten the money, so it was the other party who broke the contract. What was there to be afraid of? It was just that she didn't vent her anger. On the other side, Qin Chen hung up the phone. He didn't expect that Lu Wei still had tricks up her sleeves. The fashion industry was the same as the entertainment industry. There were all kinds of dark secrets that caught you off guard. It was just that this little dark secret had blown up Lan Yu and Qin Chen's secret marriage. Chapter 30:30. Qin Chen brought Little Red to the Grand Hyatt Hotel. They went to that famous restaurant and ordered a lot of high-calorie food. Little Red's expression was complicated. If Sister Quan finds out, she made a hand gesture.
"Kill me."
Qin Chen smiled. "Just don't let her find out. Besides, you can still be my assistant even if you don't want to be a model anymore. It's not a problem for me to support you." If he really couldn't support her, Qin Chen thought immorally, "I'll just let Lan Yu support me. He likes to do good things anyway." As Qin Chen thought of this, he smiled faintly. Her smile was so charming that a handsome foreign man sat down next to her and struck up a conversation with her. The man spoke with a pure British accent. He looked charming and his voice was also charming. Qin Chen was able to deal with him easily, but Little Red almost fainted. Her eyes were filled with hearts. He was so handsome. The foreign man even performed a little magic trick. Qin Chen held his chin and looked like he was enjoying it. Little Red sighed inwardly. There was a huge difference between people. Qin Chen ate happily and chatted with the handsome foreign man. In the dark, the camera was on her. Even when the man politely sent them to their room, the camera ignored Little Red and went straight to Qin Chen and the man. And the suite was Lan Yu's room. When the news broke out, it was mediocre abroad, but it blew up in China. Qin Chen met a mysterious man and spent the night together. Such headlines were very eye-catching. At the headquarters of Grand Hyatt in B City, Lan Yu threw down the newspaper and pressed the intercom. Kevin, get in here, in 1 minute. Kevin, who was in the secretary's office, felt wronged. He wasn't the one who made the boss a cuckold. Why did he have to get out? But he didn't dare not come. He coughed and said, Boss, do you need a private plane? We'll take off in an hour. Lan Yu took his coat and car keys and walked out. What happened to Qin couldn't be a coincidence. Someone must have instructed him to do so. Moreover, he and Qin had a secret marriage. Now the first step was to expose Qin's scandal, and the next step would be to expose his marriage with Qin. Then he would never be able to clear his name of adultery. He, Lan Yu, would be green all over his head. He had to deal with this matter as soon as possible. As he walked, he told Kevin, send out a press release. Just say that I'm with Qin in New York. Announce our marriage. Kevin was a little frightened. Do we need to ask for Miss Qin's opinion on this? Lan Yu tilted his head, and his expression was very ugly. She's already cuckolded me. Do you think I still need her opinion? Kevin didn't say anything else. He coughed lightly and said somewhat uncomfortably, then I'll do it immediately. More than 10 hours later, Lan Yu appeared in the presidential suite of the Grand Hyatt in New York. He put down his luggage and slowly walked to the master bedroom. It was early in the morning in New York, so Qin was still sleeping. She was sleeping soundly with her face buried in the pillow, looking carefree. Lan Yu walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and touched her face. She had made such a big mess, and there were rumors outside. Even his father had specially called him and asked him if there was anything wrong with his body. She, on the other hand, was sleeping here without a care in the world. Of course, he believed that she had nothing to do with that man. Chapter 30-31. Because he had checked the surveillance footage. Her assistant was there too. The man had left after sending them back. But this would also make him uncomfortable, attracting bees and butterflies. He spat out these words unwillingly, then took off his coat and threw it aside, followed by other clothes. After taking it off, he went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. When he came out, he wrapped himself in a bath towel and ordered breakfast for himself. Then, he sat in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and smoked, waiting for the waiter to bring it up. Breakfast was delivered in 10 minutes. A silver dining car had all kinds of exquisite breakfast on it. There was also a bouquet of pink roses, which were even stained with morning dew. Lan Yu opened the door and let the waiter in. After tipping him, he closed the door. Qin still hadn't woken up. He couldn't help but wonder how crazy she had been last night to sleep so soundly. Thus, he took a rose and walked towards her. The rose gently touched her cheek, and Qin felt a little itchy. She just patted it lightly and turned over to continue sleeping. Piggy. Lan Yu chuckled, leaned over, and kissed her with his hands on both sides of her body. The kiss was a little lingering. He didn't know why. He should be angry with her, but when he saw her sleeping on his bed, he couldn't be angry at all. As the kiss deepened, she finally woke up. She opened her eyes and looked at him in disbelief. Then she blinked. Lan Yu. She sat up and shook her head. Why are you here? He locked his eyes on her and sneered. If I don't come, I'm afraid I'll wear a green hat from New York to be city. Qin looked at him. Do you believe it? I don't believe it, but others will. Or if they don't believe it, they'll light a party. He said seriously, now I need to make our marriage public. Qin's eyes widened. You can't. I can. I've already done that. There was a hint of joy in Lan Yu's voice. Didn't your assistant or Sister Quan tell you? Qin glared at him. He nodded understandingly. It seems that you're a failure as a person. Qin snorted. Nonsense. She raised her eyebrows. Aren't you afraid that I'll really make you a cuckold? You won't. Lan Yu then changed into a bathrobe and walked towards the dining room. It's just that I really don't like it when you're with the opposite sex. What did he mean by he didn't like her being with the opposite sex? Did she not want to come into contact with men? In her workplace, most of the staff were men, but he didn't say anything about it. However, Qin didn't have time to think about this because there was a very fragrant smell in the air. It was the smell of food. She immediately lifted the quilt and ran over barefoot. A bouquet of roses was thrown into her arms. She hugged them and smelled them. Then, she sat down beside him. So, it turns out that you can still get a gift after cheating. Can I say that CEO Lon is really generous? Chin said, amused. Lon Yu glanced at her and didn't say anything as he continued to eat his breakfast. However, Chin was not afraid of death. She dared to continue, then I'll ask out a few more men in the future.
Try it.
Lon Yu reached out and shook her hand gently. She cried out softly, eat. Breakfast is different with you. Lon Yu didn't let go of her. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. His thin lips gently covered the back of her ear and murmured, do it here once. Chapter 30-32. Chin was furious. Are you here to take care of business, or are you here to, as a reward, he murmured. Do you want to do it yourself, or do you want me to do it, Hans? Chin closed his eyes and said, can we go back to bed after breakfast?
Okay.
He then let go of her and let her go back to her seat to eat breakfast. She glared at him, feeling that he was uneasy. Speaking of which, he came to New York to take care of business, but she didn't know if he had come to the country to have sex. Therefore, Chin also despised him. Lon Yu said as he ate, I'm not messing around in the country. Mrs. Lon should be happy. Messing around is good, she said in a low voice. Lon Yu raised his eyes and looked at her quietly. You don't mean what you say. I'm not. She lowered her eyes and reached out to stroke her long hair. It was quite a seductive action. However, Lon Yu's focus wasn't on that. He stared at her face and asked, you don't seem to have washed your face and brushed your teeth. Chin, you're already eating breakfast? The Chin he knew in the past wasn't like this. Except during the surgery, he was extremely hairy. Chin looked at him and said, yes. He restrained his voice and said, you weren't so lazy before. She looked a lot more beautiful and feminine now, but she still couldn't change what was in her bones. Suddenly, Lon Yu accepted Chin's change from the bottom of his heart. She had become a real woman. She had changed, so she had let go of her obsession with Ronglei. In fact, it didn't matter if she didn't let go. Ronglei didn't have anything left, so there was nothing to miss. Lon Yu smiled and put down his knife and fork. Mrs. Lon, is that okay? However, he was just asking for her opinion. He soon picked her up and walked to the master bedroom. Chin patted him on the shoulder. I knew you were here for this. You're still so stupid because of this. You still care about me? Lon Yu said unhappily, and then kissed her lips. Early in the morning, both men and women were only wearing pajamas and bathrobes. His body smelled fresh and fragrant from the shower gel, which was intoxicating. They weren't quarreling, so their bodies were naturally attracted to each other. Hugging had become a very normal thing. She was pressed between the mattress and kissed. His hands moved up and down her body. His kiss was very aggressive, and there was not a single gap between them. Chin couldn't take it anymore, but he still remembered something and pushed him away slightly. You don't have that thing here? Lon Yu propped himself up and lowered his head to kiss the corner of her mouth. His eyes were clear. Which one? She mouthed a word to him. Then he kissed her hard. Chin, why are you looking for this here? What are you looking for this for, huh? He bit her lips angrily. With another man? I'm checking on you. She couldn't do anything about it. She turned over and sat on him. If you dare to do this to me again, I'll bite you to death. Childish. Lon Yu was pressed down by her like this, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he reached out one hand and dialed the internal line naturally. He used fluent English to ask the front desk to send 2 big boxes of condoms. Chin sat on him and covered her face. She couldn't listen to him anymore. He was really shameless. He had specially told her about the taste, thickness, and sensitivity. Chapter 30-33. You're already so old, and you've already given birth to a child.
How can you still be shy?
He naturally couldn't say it out loud. He didn't mind Rongyu's identity that much. She had given birth to the child, and he liked the child too. Qin refused to let go and let him kiss her, so he pestered her. There was a knock on the door. He paused and patted her. Go get it. I'm not going, Qin said stubbornly. At this moment, she was a bit like a child. She was a very mature woman, but she was very relaxed in front of him. It was probably because she had been too indulgent these days, and her body and mind were happy. Lanyu looked at her deeply and patted her lazily. Then move away so I can go. Qin didn't move, and then she hugged him shamelessly. Don't go. He raised his eyebrows. What are you doing now? Do you want to give birth to a son for me to make up for the trouble you caused in New York? The news was released by your ex-fiancé. Qin buried her face in his neck and said impolitely. Lanyu looked at her and snorted. Is that so? He looked at her with a serious expression. Qin snorted. Of course, she framed me. It sounds innocent, but Mrs. Lan, did you smile at that man? Did you ask someone to send it back? He patted her impolitely, as if he was secretly punishing her. Qin didn't say anything. Lanyu didn't move her to the side, but carried her to the door. He opened the door with one hand and took the 2 big boxes from the receptionist with the other. After closing the door, she was in trouble. He was fast, and he was already ready when he arrived at the master bedroom.
He took her down in one fell swoop.
Qin stroked his handsome and twisted face, bit his lips and said angrily, You're here to have sex. You really know me. He gritted his teeth, but then he closed his eyes to enjoy it and warned her, Pay attention. He felt unsatisfied when he closed his eyes, so he opened them to kiss her. If it weren't for the surveillance, he really suspected that Mrs. Lan's active cooperation was because she had done something wrong. However, he also thought that she didn't do anything out of line in the hotel. How would he know if they were outside? Thus, he tortured her even more ruthlessly. As he tortured her, he asked in a low voice, Tell me, did you and him do the same? Other than me, have you ever seen anyone else make you like this? Qin's brown hair was spread out on the pillow and her facial features were especially charming. Hearing his words, she opened her eyes and said in a hoarse voice, What? Can other people satisfy you as much as I do? He felt like he was going to die, indulging in this feeling. Qin couldn't take it anymore. He turned his head and bit the pillow. When she did not speak, he became even more unreasonable. He did it again and again. Just like that, after 2 hours, he finally loosened his grip on her and started to take his time. He hugged her from behind and asked in a low voice, Chun, are you happy? Qin? Qin froze for a moment. It seemed like it was the first time he had called her that since they were together. But he said it so naturally, she had a feeling that Lanyu seemed to have changed. It seemed like he had thought through something and made some decisions. Qin thought it through, but her head was dizzy and she couldn't understand it. Only now did she know that men were misleading. Chapter 30-34. After a whole morning, Lanyu was finally satisfied. After 2 hours of sleep, he started to make some calls, mainly to the public relations department. Qin leaned against the headboard lazily, painting her nails. After making the calls, Lanyu went back to bed and smoked a cigarette. He looked at her and said, Are you not going to be on the cover of ZA's magazine? Qin said indifferently, I don't really care. It's mainly about what the magazine thinks. If it's because of Lu Wei's feelings, it's fine if I take the money and don't do anything. Lanyu frowned. She hadn't thought about how Lu Wei's team would pressure her if she didn't do the shoot. However, Qin knew about it. She just couldn't be bothered to care about it. Lanyu shook his head and said, How did you become an international supermodel? Natural beauty and a little luck. Qin chuckled and said, Why? Do you want me to quit for my ex-girlfriend? He patted her face and said, Bullshit. He thought for a moment and said, Actually, there's nothing between us. At most it was just a few light kisses. Nothing had happened. Qin stared at him and said, Is that an explanation? It's obvious. Lanyu's eyes were clear. Qin felt that it was a bit troublesome. Lanyu seemed to be serious. Lanyu had always thought that when he hated her more than he loved her, he wouldn't be so good to her and he wouldn't want to be with her for a long time. However, it was obvious that he had lost his mind and wanted to love her. A long time wasn't what Qinshan wanted. She coughed and said, "Actually, it's not that important. You really don't have to keep yourself pure for me." Lanyu frowned and immediately understood what she was thinking. She didn't want him. At least, she didn't want to be with him forever. It didn't feel good. It was like going back to 3 or 4 years ago. He looked at her for a long time, but didn't say anything. He just lifted the blanket and walked out. Qinshan felt that he was going through menopause again. Were all men so emotional nowadays? But she still had to care about his feelings. After all, she was counting on him to solve the ZA issue and her scandal. If Lanyu stood out now and said a word that was not good for her, her career would be over. Although she didn't care that much, Qinshan didn't have the habit of letting others take advantage of him. In the end, Qinshan still walked to the study room attached to the suite. When he opened the door, he saw Lanyu smoking. His expression was one of disillusionment. For some reason, Qinshan felt a little sad when he saw this. She whispered, "Lanyu, you're here because I'm still useful, right?" He looked up at her, his eyes red. Qinshan pursed her lips and said softly, "No." She walked over to Lanyu and said, "Aren't you afraid of meeting God by smoking so much every day?" He let her take the cigarette and put it away, but he lit another one and continued smoking. Qinshan frowned and said, "Just smoke yourself to death." With that, she ignored him and prepared to go out. He caught her hand, and her body fell into his embrace. He hugged her tightly and said in a low voice, "Don't go." His voice was hoarse and he was begging her not to go. He said in a low voice, "I shouldn't be like this. I forgot about you, forgot about me, forgot that you don't love me." Qinshan was a little stunned. She didn't know why, but she felt sad when she heard him say such things. It was as if she owed him a lot. Chapter 30-35. So she asked him softly, "Lanyu, have we ever been in love before?" In her memory, she didn't remember loving Ronglei, but she had given birth to a child for Ronglei, but she subconsciously felt that something was wrong. As for what was wrong, she couldn't tell. Lanyu smiled, shook his head, and said indifferently, "No, never." Qinshan was stunned. She was a little disappointed. Had she really never loved him? Why did she feel uncomfortable when she saw his dejected look? So she forced a smile. Maybe in the future? Lanyu lit a cigarette out of habit and said, "Actually, it doesn't matter if you don't like it." Because he was used to it. "Go out first. I want to be alone for a while," he said calmly. He didn't make things difficult for her. Qinshan felt that arguing with her and being fierce with her was better than this. At least she didn't need to care like this. She pursed her lips and gave him space. But when she walked out of the door, Lanyu's voice came from behind her. "Qinshan, it's actually not like that. I used to love you very much. There was a time when you thought you loved me, and I thought so too." As he said these words, his voice was full of bitterness. Qinshan was a little stunned. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "I'm sorry." "You shouldn't say sorry if you don't love someone." He smiled.
"But you're my wife now, Qinshan."
Qinshan looked at him and suddenly ran in. She hugged him gently. "Lanyu, I can work hard." He naturally understood what she meant, so he chuckled softly. "Don't force yourself." "I don't want it. I promise I'll work hard," Qinshan said seriously. Lanyu smiled. She probably hadn't promised anyone like this before. "Then I'll wait and see." With that, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. She pushed against him. When she was unwilling, he whispered, "Didn't you just say you wanted to work hard? Why are you so reluctant now?" Qinshan looked at him speechlessly. "I'm afraid that you'll die when your essence runs out." Wasn't he tired of doing this all day long? Lanyu was stunned for a while before he slowly said, "You don't know how a man feels after 4 years of abstinence. Qinshan, come here. If you don't do it soon, I'll be too old to move." He was now over 35 years old and was considered an uncle. Men of this age also had a common problem, which was that they doubted themselves or were afraid that women would think that they couldn't do it, so they had to prove themselves. Qin Chun was the person he wanted to prove. He had been there for 2 days. In the end, Qin Chun had been woken up by Sister Quan's phone call. Zia has decided to abandon you. Lu Wei's solo edition. Isn't that hot news? Qin Chun was still a little lazy. She climbed out of the blanket and answered the phone with one hand while plucking a man's xiong hair with the other. She was a little bored as she counted. Let her do it. I'm doing it with her ex-fiancé now. I think I'm feeling pretty good, Qin Chun said casually. Sister Quan was furious. Qin Chun, you can still fool around with men now? What kind of situation is this? We're legally married, not fooling around, Qin Chun said slowly. Chapter 30-36. Qin Chun smiled. Actually, I think so too. Sister Quan was speechless. She felt that she had brought along a piece of trash. His smile was especially beautiful. However, she also knew that the reason why Qin Chun was like this was because of his family circumstances. She didn't need to experience those dark things. She had the capital to do whatever she wanted. What Lu Wei and the others pursued their entire lives, Qin Chun had it since birth. Therefore, when Lu Wei came to fight with Qin Chun, she was like a clown. It meant that no matter how you jumped around, others would ignore you. While Sister Quan was letting her imagination run wild, Lan Yu picked up the phone. As soon as Sister Quan spoke, she went straight to the point. President Lan, you've already married him. What do you plan to do now? Lan Yu said in a low voice, my marriage with Qin Chun has been announced in B City. I'll arrange for an interview in New York for Zia's special. He didn't know Sister Quan's reaction, but Qin Chun was stunned. Lu Wei was on the cover, and it was an interview between her and Lan Yu, and it was about marriage. Wasn't that strange? After Lan Yu hung up the phone, she looked at him and said, Are you going to let your ex-girlfriend attack you? She snorted softly. I don't want to make enemies. She sighed and said, Actually, you had a change of heart. She should be looking for you if she's angry. Lan Yu, I'm innocent.
No.
He said with certainty, I never had a change of heart. Qin Chun was stunned and blinked. Was he confessing? Lan Yu still looked at her. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Chun Chun, a person may like many people in their life, but there must be one person they love the most. She looked at him and blinked for a long time. She was rarely so soft in front of him. Needless to say, in the past, she was simply a man. After they reunited, she was also very cold. Now, it was just right. Lan Yu murmured, Chun Chun, leave it to me. I'll handle it. Qin Chun smiled weakly. I'm not a timid person. I know. He smiled. Then let's be more high-profile. The Grand Hyatt Corporation's press release was still very useful. In addition, Lan Yu and Qin Chun had accepted an exclusive interview with the BBC in the US, and they chose Zia for the paper interview. And Qin Chun and Lan Yu were on the cover of Zia's Global Edition. This series of events was like a slap to Lu Wei's face. More importantly, the filming was done on the same day in the same studio. Zia's boss wasn't a pushover either. He used Lu Wei and Lan Yu's relationship as a selling point and made a big deal out of the magazine. He was secretly prepared to double the print run. And Lu Wei didn't know that she was still arguing with Zia's chief editor. Zia's chief editor was also speechless. Lu Wei didn't know that her actions weren't just personal, they had become a selling point. Unknowingly, she had become a dishonorable character. This was very detrimental to her future career. But Lu Wei couldn't see it. She was protesting against the shoot. It was fine if she didn't do it, but Zia's boss was doing it. If she didn't do it, it would be a breach of contract. Would she pay the 50 million penalty? What a joke. They had already spent a lot of money to promote this issue. If Lu Wei said she didn't do it, wouldn't all their previous investments go down the drain? This was something Zia couldn't tolerate. If Lu Wei dared to breach the contract, not only would she have to pay, she would also be blacklisted. Chapter 30-37. Behind Lu Wei, There were many oriental faces waiting to rise. She wasn't young anymore, but she didn't have any self-awareness. She was still acting big, and these foreigners wouldn't care about her. Of course, there was also Lan Yu's operation. He didn't care about these interests. He only wanted Qin not to feel wronged or angry. In addition, this was also a warning to Lu Wei. However, Lu Wei didn't have such a consciousness at all. She felt that everything was caused by Qin. Therefore, she still had to turn the tide for the cover. She wanted to take the most stunning photos and let Lan Yu know who was better, her or Qin. When taking photos, Lu Wei met Lan Yu and his wife. Qin had an extra diamond ring on his ring finger. It was so big that it almost blinded Lu Wei's eyes. No, it was stinging. She looked at Lan Yu holding Qin. His expression was very focused. He had never been so focused when he was with her. Lu Wei pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Her face was already very ugly. Lan Yu didn't say anything to her. He gave Lu Wei compensation and he didn't have sex with Lu Wei. Even the engagement was arranged by her own initiative. He was responsible, but it was all because she was too anxious. Lan Yu didn't feel guilty, probably because he didn't care so much. But when taking photos, Lu Wei wasn't so calm. Qin was shooting the cover with Lan Yu, which was simply humiliating for her. But she wouldn't give up. She wanted to outshine Qin. However, 1-on-2, she had already lost. Not to mention that it was a cover that abused dogs. The cover of Lan Yu and Qin was very simple. It was taken in the kitchen. Lan Yu wore a simple white shirt and black casual pants, while Qin wore a loose beige t-shirt. His hair was a little fluffy, and his long slender legs were straight and bare. He hugged Lan Yu from behind. Lan Yu turned his head and looked at her. The scene was beautiful. The cameraman took a few photos and looked at them one by one, asking them to style them. There was a picture of Qin being carried onto the tabletop and Lan Yu kissing him while standing. It was especially beautiful. The head of ZA personally made the decision. This will be the cover. When Qin was changing his clothes, he met Lu Wei in the changing room. Lu Wei Kai was very confident after taking the photo. She glanced at Qin and said, "You and him won't last long." The reason why he announced it was because he was afraid of the scandal. That's why you shouldn't announce it, because you're afraid of a scandal, right? Qin touched up a little bit of lipstick in front of the mirror, put away her makeup bag, and said lightly, "Actually, people who deceive themselves live a very tiring life. They also live for others." She had never regarded Lu Wei as an opponent. Whether it was her career or Lan Yu, the modeling industry was purely because she was fooling around. As for Lan Yu, she did not care that much about it. So there was no need for Lu Wei to do this. She would be confused and Lu Wei would be tired. Qin felt that it was not worth it. She just wanted to enjoy life now. Of course, Lan Yu was indeed restraining her. If it wasn't for his threat, she would probably never have the chance to live with such a man. For now, it seemed like it was not bad. She did not intend to return it to Lu Wei. Basically, if Qin liked to use something, he would use it until it was worn out. If a man used it until it was worn out, could he still use it? When she was about to walk out, Lu Wei said, "I won't lose to you. Up to you." Qin's tone was very calm. "But you might be disappointed." Lu Wei gritted her teeth and left first. Chapter 30-38. Lan Yu's eyes were deep. "It has nothing to do with you. Lu Wei, my patience is limited." "Really?" Lu Wei laughed coldly. She laughed mockingly. "Lan Yu, our past is not in the past anymore, right?" There was a cold smile on her face. "You will regret it." After saying that, when Qin walked out, Lu Wei leaned over and kissed the corner of Lan Yu's lips. Lan Yu frowned and looked at Qin. Qin didn't seem to mind at all. He said calmly, "Do you want to leave for a bit?" "Chun." He called her angrily. Lu Wei's expression changed. "Chun, did Lan Yu call Qin like that? Then what was she?" He had never called her by her nickname. And how long had Lan Yu and Qin been together? They were living together. Not only did they live together, but they also made it known to the world. Their love was love, but her feelings were feelings? Lu Wei walked away with a sullen expression. In fact, no matter who took the cover better, she had already lost. The comments in China had long been reversed. It was all about Lan Yu and Qin Chen's love. Of course, there was also a grand wedding. And the person who made Lan Yu's secret marriage come to light was none other than Lu Wei herself. When Zie's cover came out, Lu Wei completely broke down. Qin Chen and Lan Yu were very natural. Lu Wei was a model herself, so she naturally knew what it meant to get rid of and what it meant to shoot naturally. She sat on the toilet alone, staring at the photos and crying her heart out. She lost. She was utterly defeated. Her agent called and scolded her. This time, Lu Wei was almost blacklisted by the company. But she didn't give up. She lost in love, but she would definitely win in other areas. She wanted to crush Qin Chen in the supermodel rankings. At that moment, the announcement of Qin Chen's withdrawal from the fashion circle came out. Qin Chen quit. When she was at the peak of her popularity, even Lan Yu was surprised. He returned to the villa, thinking about how to talk to Qin Chen about it. When he came back, he untied his coat and asked the servants, "Where's Madam?" The servant looked surprised. "Madam is upstairs." Lan Yu walked upstairs, casually threw his coat on the back of the sofa, and looked at the master bedroom. Qin Chen was not there. He went in and heard a noise coming from the locker room. He went and opened the door. Qin Chen was packing his luggage. Lan Yu frowned. "Where are we going?" They had only been back for 2 days, and the wedding was in a week. She had announced her retirement from the fashion industry, and now she was going out again? Qin Chen said without thinking, "Go back to France?" "Back to France." And she used the word "go back." She was packing her luggage, so she didn't see how upset he was. Lan Yu frowned and said softly, "Qin Chen, who are you going to see this time? You found that you don't love me, but you found that you are happier with him. Did you find that you and he are in the same world? Huh? Even though I can easily crush that kingdom, you still love him, don't you?" His face was ugly, and he approached her step by step. In the end, he pressed her against the wardrobe in the locker room. Before she could react, her clothes were torn to pieces. Lan Yu's eyes were bloodshot. At that moment, there was a red mist in front of him. He didn't know what was wrong with him. He only knew that he couldn't let her go. He had to keep her. Chapter 39. Qin Chen felt a sharp pain in the back of her head as he pressed her down hard. She frowned and looked at the man in front of her. There was a red mist in front of her. She seemed to remember something. It flashed past. The eyes of the man on top of her were bloodshot. He grabbed her shoulders and said in a frighteningly hoarse voice, "How long are you going to be with him this time? Qin Chen, you don't have a heart. Is it because I can't move you no matter what I do?"
Huh.
With that, he threw a punch in her direction. She closed her eyes. But the punch hit the side of her body, and the cabinet door shook a few times. She opened her eyes wide, and there was a trace of fear in them. She was afraid of him. Lan Yu held her sharp chin with his fingers. "Tell me, what am I in your heart? Tell me, what am I?" Then she was kissed by him. He kissed her fiercely, from her lips to the back of her ears. His actions were not gentle at all. Instead, they were somewhat obscene. Qin Chen couldn't help it. She closed her eyes slightly and said in a trembling voice, "Lan Yu, let go." He didn't let go and directly pressed against her. It was extremely rude. Although he wasn't so gentle before, he wasn't so rough either. Qin Chen cried because of him. She couldn't struggle, so she could only make herself look worse. Slowly, she lowered her face and let him do whatever he wanted. Everything calmed down. Her body slid down. Lan Yu let go of her and slowly took a few steps back. "Qin Chen, you can go wherever you want, but this time you leave. Don't ever come back." Qin Chen was a little dazed. She felt that she was surrounded by things that she had dropped, which she couldn't see or touch. But she knew that it was her pride. She was Qin Chen. She wouldn't allow a man to treat her like this. He said that he loved her and that he was so good to her, but there was no trust. There was no trust in the past, and there was no trust now. In the past, Qin felt a burst of pain in the back of her head. She closed her eyes and vaguely saw some images. She held his hand. She felt as if she had lost something. She desperately wanted to know, but she did not know. When she raised her eyes again, she vaguely felt that she had lost herself. Qin stood up slowly. She didn't go to France, and she didn't tell Lanyu that she was going to France to complete the formalities. That was because her current residence was in France. However, there was no need for that. She propped herself up and walked in front of the mirror. She straightened her clothes that had been torn into a mess. She whispered to herself, "It's nothing." It was just a man she had never wanted to love in the first place. Qin looked at the bruises and closed his eyes. She was still carrying her suitcase downstairs. The servant was shocked to see her. "Madam, where is Madam going?" The servant also saw Lanyu's appearance and felt that there was something wrong between the couple. Qin paused. "I'm on a business trip." The servant hesitated for a moment and asked, "Madam, when will you come back so that I can tell sir?" Qin looked at her. After a while, he said calmly, "I will never come back." After saying that, she put her luggage into the suitcase, opened the door, and got into the car. She had very few things here to begin with, and this box of things was emptied. The servant wanted to stop her, but he couldn't. He could only call on you, but he couldn't get through. Chapter 3040. The next day, the photos of Lanyu and a starlet in the hotel appeared on the headlines. The financial section, the entertainment section, none of them could be missed. With such a big commotion, Qin naturally wouldn't miss it. She sat quietly on the sofa, reading the newspaper. She didn't call to ask, because that was what a wife who loved her husband deeply would do. She just flew to France to deal with some things. When she flew back, it was already a month later. A month was enough for a lot of things to happen. For example, Lanyu promoted Lu Wei. Qin became yesterday's flower. Qin didn't care about this. She sat in her apartment. She thought that she was ready to love him well. However, she gave up the career that she was interested in. She gave up the Rome Corporation. She didn't care about the world, and she didn't get that man's trust. They were actually vulnerable. It wasn't that he said he loved her, and she wanted to love him well. He was mentally ill, so the slightest thing was enough to make him suspect her. She didn't know their past. Now she didn't want to think about it. Qin went on a trip with little Rongyu. She sold the Rome Corporation. She resisted the pressure and diluted the shares of the Rome Corporation, and the laboratory of the Rome Corporation was permanently sealed. That was the only thing she had left in the Rome Corporation. No one else could touch it except her. Because of independence, she used the shares of the entire Rome Corporation to get it. Qin thought that maybe the reason why she didn't do this at the beginning was not because she couldn't bear to give up the wealth. It was because she didn't hate Lanyu. That was why she slept with him over and over again. At that time, he and Lu Wei were still together. She had liked him, she thought. Qin smiled and let the night wind blow on her face. Now she didn't want anything. She just wanted to be quiet. She returned to B City for a few days, and it wasn't that she didn't hear about Lanyu's scandal. She didn't care about other small stars, but she was really disgusted by Lu Wei. Qin had always been a little clean, so of course, she couldn't accept it. When she went to Shenyuan the next day, she ran into Huang Xia. Her distant cousin was now disabled. Cousin Huang always looked at her with a hateful gaze, but Qin couldn't be bothered with her. This time, Huang Xia's gaze was much kinder. She even asked Qin to sit in the Starbucks across the street. The two of them sat down. Huang Xia looked at Qin and suddenly handed her a photo. Qin took it. It was a strange version of himself. "Do you see? This is how you used to be." Huang Xia chuckled, a little mocking. "For Rome Lei, you turned yourself into a man for more than 10 years. Later on, it was Lanyu who changed you. You two like each other very much." Qin squinted at her. "What are you talking about?" The wonderful story is at the end. Like an old witch in a fairy tale, Huang Xia's voice was hoarse and evil. Later, Rong Lei came back to life, and you were with Rong Lei again. The premise was that you discovered Lan Yu's disloyalty, but that was also your own doing. Of course, later you fell in love with Lan Yu, but Rong Lei threatened you and took you to France. Chapter 3041. Qin Qin just looked at her quietly. It's really interesting, but for someone who lost his memory, nothing else matters except the ending. You want to give up on him? Huang Xia's voice was incredulous. Qin Qin got up and looked at her condescendingly. Why can't I? He let you down. Your sacrifice has been in vain. Don't you feel pain? Don't you feel sad? Huang Xia was very immersive. I won't. Qin Qin's voice was very slow. If I really sacrificed something in the past, then it must have been something I was willing to do. But now, he isn't worthy of my love, so I won't take back anything. With that said, she walked out in a straight line. Huang Xia stood up immediately. Qin Qin, you haven't changed at all. You're still so stubborn and still don't care about anyone. Qin Qin turned back and smiled faintly. When others don't care about you that much, you still hug his leg and beg. Isn't that too laughable and cheap? Huang Xia's body swayed as if she had suffered a huge blow. In fact, that was indeed the case. She had never thought that Qin Qin would be like this, that he would be so indifferent. She laughed. All these years, she had been too silly. Everything she was stubborn about was a joke in Qin Qin's eyes. When Qin Qin walked out, he happened to meet someone he shouldn't have touched. Lan Yu and Lu Wei. She lowered her gaze and smiled lightly. When you're free, you can sign your name. Lan Yu, you should have received the divorce agreement I sent, right? Lan Yu stared at her. He knew that she had misunderstood. Lu Wei was supported by Qin Mo and it had nothing to do with him. As for that little celebrity, he did have the intention to anger her, but it was just a little ambiguous. He didn't sleep with other women. Of course, he didn't want to explain it to her. Both of them were angry, so it was impossible to have a good talk. Lu Wei smiled. Lan Yu, do you need me to leave for a while? Qin Qin said calmly, no need. I'll find another place for you. Lan Yu grabbed her hand. Don't go. His Adam's apple bobbed. We'll talk when we get back tonight. I won't. Qin Qin said softly. I won't go back. His brow furrowed. Then, he heard Qin Qin say something very lethal. If you've loved me, you should know that I'm a neat freak. With that, she broke free from him and went straight to the parking lot to get her car. Lan Yu abandoned Lu Wei and chased after her. Qin Qin had already sat in the white BMW and was about to start the car. Lan Yu couldn't stop her, so he ran to the front to stop the car. Qin Qin's eyes were slightly cold, and he didn't seem to stop. In the end, he still retreated to the side, his face covered in dirt. He stood there and watched her car disappear into the distance. Lan Yu had a feeling that he had completely lost her this time. Huang Xia floated out of nowhere. She looked at Lan Yu and said straightforwardly, it was your lack of trust that caused you to lose her. She smiled softly and said, who do you think Qin Qin is? How dare you provoke her like this? Lan Yu, I really want to tell you a story. It's very nice. Do you want to hear it? Lan Yu didn't want to bother with this lunatic, but the lunatic kept pestering him. But Madman kept pestering him. Just now, I told Qin Qin that her sacrifice back then was a mistake. Guess what she said? Chapter 3042. I mean, she left you and went to France because she didn't want you to be hurt. Even the child in her belly. Didn't you suspect that it wasn't Rong Lei's? That child is so much like you. Unfortunately, her surname is probably Rong now. Haha, Lan Yu, this is your retribution. Huang Xia said happily. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. She laughed crazily. Lan Yu, Qin Qin sacrificed so much for you and even forgot everything about you. Have you ever thought that she might face a madman like Rong Lei when she was pregnant with your child? Lan Yu clenched his fingers. He stared at Huang Xia, Who told you this? Myself. Huang Xia looked at him with a look of disdain. Do you really love her? If you love her, you won't doubt her. In fact, I feel sorry for Qin Chen, but it's good that she has forgotten about it now. At least she doesn't have to suffer anymore. Lan Yu closed his eyes slightly and turned to get into his car. He wanted to find Qin Chen. What should he say to her when he found her? He didn't know. He only knew that he had to find her. Lan Yu drove to Qin Chen's apartment. He had a hunch that she would be there. He saw her car at the foot of her building. He stopped the car, opened the door, and got out. He took the elevator to the top floor. He knocked on the door, and about 5 minutes later, she opened the door. She was wearing a bathrobe. She opened the door and looked at him quietly. Lan Yu was about to speak when he saw that she wasn't alone. There was a young and good-looking man inside. Lan Yu had seen him before. He should be a member of a certain idol group. He was very popular recently. The man was lying casually on Qin Chen's sofa. His face was tilted as if he was asleep. Qin Chen had just returned, which meant that the man had been at Qin Chen's house. They were living together. This was Lan Yu's first reaction. Then he narrowed his eyes and looked at Qin Chen's face.
Who is he?
Qin Chen tilted his head. You should know who he is. Lan Yu's hand grabbed her and pulled her out. His face twisted as he asked through gritted teeth, What I'm asking is, what is his relationship with you? Qin Chen looked at him and chuckled. My relationship with him is the same as your relationship with those starlets and Lu Wei. Oh, right. Paging you is quite young, I call him little puppy. The veins on Lan Yu's forehead bulged. He held her neck and said hoarsely, Get him out of here immediately. You're the one who should scram. Qin Chen's tone was indifferent. She tilted her head and said, Lan Yu, I hate how unpredictable you are. I don't like how you're in control of everything. I hate it even more when you act like I owe you $2 million. His expression was gloomy. Aren't you afraid that I'll attack the Rhone Consortium? Do it. Qin Chen smiled. Lan Yu, I'm not so great that I have to trade my freedom for other people's happiness. You can do whatever you want. Up to you. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and said softly, It seems that you've done a lot these days. Qin Chen lowered his eyes and lowered his voice. Lan Yu, if you hadn't gone to find someone else that day, we wouldn't have come this far. He wanted to say something, but she interrupted him. Not every woman will stand there and wait for you. At least, I won't. Xia told me about her past. Chapter 3043. Qin Chen looked at him with a gentle expression. Lan Yu, no matter what happened in the past, I can't accept you after we're together again. So you want to divorce me and be with this gigolo? He held her shoulders and asked her in a low voice. What can he give you? You and he don't live in the same world. You once told me. I said that the past isn't important. The future is the most important. Qin Chen laughed at himself. He can give me happiness. He won't be fickle, he won't hurt me, and he won't rape me against my will. He won't have contact with other women when we're together. If we're not together, he'll tell me. Lan Yu, that's what I want. It's very simple. And you can't do it at all.
She smiled.
I tried, but you crossed my bottom line in just a few days. When he and that little celebrity were in the newspaper, they were in the hotel. But no matter what happened, he did it on purpose for her to see. She knew it too well. So it was impossible. She had grass growing on her head, and she still wanted to keep this man for the new year? Lan Ding's face darkened. I won't divorce you. Whatever. If you think that marriage certificate means anything, just keep it for the new year. Qin Chen broke free from him and wanted to close the door.
But she was caught by him again.
He stared at her eyes. Whose son is Rong Yu? Qin Chen was stunned for a moment, and then he sneered, You're crazy. He's Rong Lei's son. Really? I'll do a DNA test. Lan Yu's eyes were cold. If he's my son, I'll take him back even if I have to give up everything. Qin Chen gave him a backhand slap. Despicable. He stroked his face gently, but he sneered. Does this slap mean that you're guilty? Is Rong Yu my son? Qin Chen raised his chin slightly. Rong Yu's surname is Rong. He will never be your son. Lan Yu, you disgust me. With that, she pushed him away forcefully and turned around to close the door. She pressed her back against the door, lowered her face, and covered her eyes with her hands. Pei Jingyu opened her eyes, sat up, and looked at her quietly. Did he bully you? He asked. Actually, he hadn't slept at all. His relationship with Qin Chen wasn't like that either. They were both working for Sister Quan and they were like siblings. He had no place to stay when he returned to City H, so Qin Chen invited him to stay here. It was not until Lan Yu ran over that Pei Jingyu realized that he had been used as a weapon. He put on his slippers and sighed softly. Sister Chen Chen, should I buy a huge amount of personal safety insurance or accident insurance now? With Lan Yu's ruthlessness, it wouldn't be strange if he took his life. Qin Chen walked to the bar counter to make coffee for herself. She was wearing a bathrobe, and her figure was very slender. The little puppy was familiar with her. At this time, he coughed lightly and ran over to hug her from behind. Sister Chen Chen, have you really not considered me? Although my wealth isn't as good as Lan Yu's, I'm young and strong. Qin Chen was still making coffee, and her voice was indifferent. He can work for 5 or 6 hours a night without rest.
Can you?
The little puppy was frightened and immediately packed his things and left. When he was downstairs, he was blocked by Lan Yu. The young puppy was beaten into a national treasure. Chapter 3044. Who said you could leave? Qin Chen chuckled, taking pleasure in his misfortune. Ruthless. Heartless. The puppy gritted his teeth but didn't dare to say anything. He was an artist of King Entertainment. If they wanted to promote him, they had to please him. You didn't tell me about our real relationship, did you? Qin Chen asked slowly after taking a sip of the coffee. The puppy felt wronged. I wouldn't dare. Will I be beaten to death? He asked with a hint of arrogance. It's hard to say. Qin Chen laughed. But I think you'll cooperate with me for the next show. Pei Jingyu gritted his teeth. I might as well climb into the CEO's bed. My brother isn't interested in men, and he's even less interested in transsexuals, Qin Chen told him kindly. The puppy lost his will to fight and calmed down. All right, I'll continue to serve you. But if he hits me again, I'll defend myself. Up to you. I didn't say you can't fight back, Qin Chen said coldly. Fuck, the puppy covered his eyes. Sister Chen Chen, why didn't you say so earlier? I thought you felt sorry for him. He hung up and opened the car door to walk toward Lan Yu. He was a popular celebrity. Reporters had been following him and Qin Chen for a long time. Although they didn't get any actual photos this time, they managed to capture a fight between him and Qin Chen's ex-husband. It was explosive. So, not only did they both go to the hospital with swollen faces, they even made the headlines together. The reporters followed them to the hospital. Of course, Qin Chen also received a concerned call from Qin Mo. After interrogating his sister for a while, he gave an order. The company is now promoting Pei Jingyu. Go to the hospital to visit him now and hype up your scandal. Qin Chen frowned. I'm not divorced yet. Aren't you afraid of burning him? He won't. Qin Mo coughed. Remember to buy a bouquet of flowers. With that, he hung up the phone. Qin Chen stared at her phone. After putting it down, she quietly made herself a cup of coffee, changed her clothes, and went out. When she walked into the VIP ward of Sheng Yuan with the red roses, the reporters were taking photos crazily outside. Because she entered Pei Jingyu's ward, not her future ex-husband Lan Yu's. Miss Qin, does this mean that you've chosen fresh meat? Miss Qin, are you willing to give up President Lan's assets worth hundreds of billions? Is Miss Qin and Pei Jingyu in a spiritual relationship, or have they made a breakthrough? The reporters chased after him relentlessly. Qin Chen turned his head and said expressionlessly, Jingyu and I are from the same company. Shouldn't I come to see him? Her gaze was sharp as she stared at the reporters. I don't want you to write nonsense, or I'll sue you and put you in jail. The reporters collectively gasped. They had never seen such an arrogant person. However, they went over to Lan Yu's side and conducted all kinds of interviews. It was like this. your future ex-wife went to another man's ward and didn't come to see you. Lan Yu's face was cold. Kevin, drive these reporters out. Kevin looked at his boss sympathetically and asked the security guards to drive the reporters out. Lan Yu lay on the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling. Suddenly, he asked quietly, Kevin, am I a failure? Am I very bad? That's why she retaliated against me like this. Chapter 30:45. Lan Yu looked at him with a miserable expression. Kevin coughed lightly. Actually, it's not that you're bad, boss. It's just that Miss Chin isn't an ordinary person, so you don't seem that outstanding. Lan Yu snorted and coughed lightly. What do you mean by not outstanding? Kevin was very kind. Boss, you're already in your 30s, early 30s. How can you still fight with these little fresh meats? It seems that his injuries are more serious than mine. Boss Lan said very honestly. Kevin sighed softly. The little fresh meats are injured on their bodies, but you're injured on your face. Think about it. When Miss Chin visits the little fresh meats, their faces are still pretty, but Boss Lan, you're a little miserable. Lan Yu glanced at him. Bring a mirror over. Kevin had to make a mirror and show it to Boss Lan. Lan Yu only took a glance at it before throwing it aside. He didn't want to look at it anymore. Kevin said kindly, the swelling will go down in a few days. It won't look like a pig's head anymore. His boss Lan glared at him. Kevin stood at the side and didn't say anything. On the other side of the ward, it was very lively. Chen placed the flowers by Pei Jingyu's bedside and looked at him. Sister, Chen. Pei Jingyu sighed. I was beaten up like this because of you. Because of me. Chen laughed and reached out to gently pull his black hair. Then I'll get a divorce and we'll get married, okay? Pei Jinyu's face turned green. Sister Chen, this joke isn't funny at all. Pei Jingyu tugged at her sleeve. Chen continued to say infuriatingly, weren't you fighting for me just now? Her fingers caressed Momo's good-looking face. Oh, right, do you think Mo would agree if I were to ask him to give you to me? Pei Jinyu's face darkened. Sister Chen? The little fresh meats finally revealed the secret. I have a girlfriend. You have a girlfriend? Do you want me to dig it out and get the company to freeze you? Chen threatened with a smile. Pei Jingyu finally relented. Okay, I will continue to pretend to be your boyfriend. Now he really wanted to cry. Why did he think that Chen was easy to get along with? She was the black-bellied one. Chen let go of his face and stood up with a smile. Remember to be more affectionate in front of the reporters and don't be too direct. Be careful not to affect your future. If it weren't for the fact that Pei Jingyu couldn't move, he really wanted to slap Chen to death. In the end, he could only glare at her hatefully. Chen bent down and kissed his forehead.
Good boy.
Suddenly, her hand was caught by him and she was forcefully dragged towards him, knocking into his body. The little fresh meat's eyes were filled with aggression. Don't call me a kid. In fact, he was only 2 or 3 years younger than her. Chen's hand retracted. He didn't let go of her. Don't kiss me, or I'll take it seriously, he murmured. Chen came back to his senses and patted his face. Didn't you say that you have a girlfriend? Ex-girlfriend. Pei Jingyu said softly. Chen coldly snorted and slapped his face until it was swollen. Pei Jingyu lay on the bed and smiled. I'm serious, Chen. When you divorce him, we'll be together. Chen walked out. He tilted his head and smiled. Chapter 30:46. At that time, Chen was a doctor and a beautiful older brother. He had never seen such a good-looking person. From then on, he wanted to chase after her. He became a popular actor at King Entertainment. He wanted to get close to her. He knew her well enough to sleep in her apartment, but he knew that she was not interested in him. Chen had a mystery in his heart. This mystery was Lan Yu. He knew very well in his heart, but he had been watching over her silently. He knew that she was married to Lan Yu and that the man had loved her for many years. But that man was not suitable for her. He always made her cry. Pei Jingyu's gaze was gentle until she disappeared from the ward. Perhaps he needed to wait for many years, until she and Lanyu were completely separated. He didn't care about waiting because he had waited for many years. Outside the door, Qin Chen was surrounded by reporters as soon as he walked out of the door. "Miss Qin, did you come just to see Pei Jingyu?" Qin Chen put on his sunglasses. "What does it have to do with you?" The reporters were in an uproar. It was still the same Qin Chen, the Qin Chen who never fawned over the media. However, Qin Chen still pushed open the door to Lanyu's ward and closed it, blocking the reporters' cameras. Lanyu was leaning against the headboard, reading some documents. When he heard the voice, he thought it was Kevin. "Get me a glass of water." Qin Chen walked over, poured a glass of water, and placed it by his bedside. When Lanyu picked it up, he saw her hand. He looked up and saw that it was her. Qin Chen took a step back and sat on the sofa. He said calmly, "I feel ashamed for you to fight at your age. Do you feel sorry for your pretty boy?" he asked with a frown. Qin Chen smiled. "Lanyu, if you think so, then so be it."
She actually didn't care what he said.
Lanyu put down the glass of water and continued to look at the document. He asked calmly, "You came here just to say this?" "Of course not," Qin Chen said, taking out a document and handing it to him. "This is the divorce agreement." Lanyu raised his eyes and looked at her for a moment before taking it. He took it and looked at it quietly. After a long time, he chuckled softly. "You're willing to leave the family with nothing?" Qin Chen said nothing. "But you took something from me." He threw down the document and assumed the posture of a superior. But that face was really not very beautiful. Qin Chen thought unkindly as he watched. However, Lanyu said shamelessly to her with this face, "The gold I gave you may have already made you pregnant." Qin Chen gritted his teeth. "Don't you have any shame? You can say that I forced you, but I forced you every time, didn't I?" "Qin Chen, you should know it very well." He stared at her eyes. "And Rongyu, I will make a decision when the DNA result comes out." He looked at her eyes and said in a strong voice, "He is my son. I will not give up. I can divorce, but my son belongs to me." Qin Chen looked at him for a long time and asked softly, "If it is a marriage of 3 people, won't you feel crowded?" He thought she was talking about Lu Wei, so he said in a low voice, "She will not exist in our marriage. I mean Jingyu." Qin Chen said lazily, "I quite like him if you don't mind." "Qin Chen, don't force me to do it." Lanyu's voice was a little hoarse. Chapter 3047. She smiled and said, "Are you going to be enemies with the whole Qin family and the Tang family? I don't think Boss Lan can handle it." Lanyu squinted and stared at her. "If I have to do it, I can tear your pretty boy in half even if I can't take down the Qin family. Are you jealous?" Qin Chen moved forward and reached out to touch his face. "Boss Lan, you're old. You should calm down." That was like a stab in his heart. Qin Chen kept saying that he was old. How was he old? Was there only that pretty boy in her heart now? He held her and squinted. "Can he satisfy you like I do?" "Dirty." Qin Chen stared at him. "Lanyu, what else can you do besides forcing women?" His expression suddenly became a little dazed. He suddenly said, "I've never forced anyone except you. Cher was my wife for a few years, and I never forced her if she didn't want to." Qin Chen sneered. "It sounds very loving, so you have to learn to let go like you did in the past. Lanyu, you don't know how to love anyone at all. You seem to have a lot of love, but none of them are what I want." What did she want? She wanted a man who believed in her completely. She didn't love Jingyu, but Jingyu's eyes made her feel at ease. When Jingyu looked at her, she would believe that the whole world had betrayed him, but he still believed that she wouldn't. That was trust. In Lanyu's eyes, she only saw suspicion. She stood up and said softly, "I'm a person who wants to fly. I can give up what I have because I love you. But if I don't love you and want to leave you, I can also give up a lot, including Rongyu." She was not selfish. She was gambling. He didn't really love Rongyu. He just wanted a chess piece to tie her down. After Qin Chen said that, he walked out. Lanyu swept the cup on the bedside table, and the water splashed everywhere. 3 days later, Ronyu's DNA came out. Kevin sent him to Lanyu's office. After a few days, Lanyu had mostly recovered. Other than the bruises at the corners of his mouth, he had returned to his usual handsome appearance. "Chief Lan, you're out," Kevin said softly as he placed the things on the desk. Lanyu looked up, his gaze calm. After a while, he whispered, "You go out first." Kevin knew that his boss was not in a good mood. After all, as a man, how could he not be angry when his wife was with a little fresh meat all day long during his marriage? Paging you was getting more and more popular. Kevin chimed in. "Actually, boss, you don't have to worry too much about it. I feel that all of this is just King Entertainment's hype. Their CEO, Chin Mo, loves to do things like this. He wouldn't even let his own sister off. What a beast." Lanyu glanced at him. Kevin didn't dare to say anything else and left. Lanyu picked up the file on the table and opened it with an indifferent gaze. He took a few seconds to read the final result, and then his body froze. Romeo was his son. Then everything that Huang Xia said was true. Qinshan was pregnant with his child when she married Ronglei.
How did she feel at that time?
Lanyu closed his eyes and clenched his fists. When he found out the truth, she already hated him. Lanyu raised his head, his Adam's apple moving. He wanted to see her now. Chapter 3048. When he opened his eyes, he took the DNA report and drove to her apartment. She was there alone. She opened the door and let him in. "It seems that you have made a decision," she said softly. Lanyu put the DNA report in front of her. "Romeo is my son." Qinshan took it and glanced at it. Then she smiled. "Just the provider?" Lanyu's face darkened. "Are you going to ignore this result? What else can I do?" Qinshan looked at him and said with a smile, "As far as I know, it's only a matter of tens of thousands of yuan if you buy it from a bank." "Boss Lan, do you want me to be grateful to you for tens of thousands of yuan?" He stared at her and sneered. "I've already hired a lawyer to draft the documents. If we divorce, I don't mind letting Romeo follow me. Then I'll follow you. I can also inherit the Lan family's property in the future." "That's good," Qinshan said angrily. Lanyu glared at her. Suddenly, he pulled her over and pressed her down on the sofa. Junyan approached her and said in an extremely displeased voice, "Do you hate me that much?" Qinshan looked at the face that was close to him and said, "I don't hate you, but I can't agree with you." She said it in a gloomy tone. Lanyu narrowed his eyes. "Because of that little star? I told you that there's nothing between me and her." Qinshan struggled, but couldn't get rid of him. She could only continue to be pressed down on the sofa by him. She turned her face away and said after a long time, "It's not just one thing, but many things. Lanyu, do you know that you're mentally ill? You think you love me, but you don't know how to love me. Your love will only make people want to run away." There was a trace of pain in his eyes. Qinshan continued, "Sorry, the truth is usually very hurtful." He let go of her. She sat up, her gaze calm. "End this wrong marriage. You can find a gentle girl to marry. Lanyu, don't let me become your inner demon."
"I don't want to dwell on the past."
She had tried, but he had failed her. Lanyu closed his eyes slightly. "Are you so determined because of paging you?" "No, it's because of me." Qinshan let out a long sigh and looked at him. "It has nothing to do with him." Lanyu clenched his fists. "Have you slept with him?" Qinshan did not answer this question. He grasped her chin in one swift motion. Men always cared about this kind of thing. "Tell me, have you ever slept with him?" Lanyu's thin lips spat out a few words coldly. Qinshan frowned. "This has nothing to do with you." As soon as he said those words, he was forcefully kissed. He almost rudely touched her. As he did so, he panted and asked, "When did it happen, huh?" Qinshan grabbed his hand and wanted to stop him, but he was really wild and kept doing it like that. Lanyu, her brown hair spread on the white sofa, forming a sharp contrast. It was beautiful and tempting, but at this moment, he wanted to kill her. His thin lips pressed against her ear, and he bit her hard. The force was so strong that she almost screamed, "Lanyu. Stop it, Lanyu." She called his name repeatedly, not knowing that it would arouse the man's animal nature. Chapter 30:49. In the end, he leaned on her and whispered, "Chun-chun, let's start over, okay?" His voice was almost choked. "If you forget him, I can pretend that nothing happened." This was the humblest gesture a man could make. Chun closed her eyes slightly. "Really? You really don't care?" When she opened her eyes again, she looked at him. "Lanyu, you just feel guilty. You heard what Huang Xia said, didn't you? So you feel that you need to make it up to me, but I don't need it. I'm fine now. I really don't need to live with a man I don't love." She got up and looked at him. "If you want to see Rongyu, you can still see him. I can even change his name to Lanyu if you want, but I won't force myself to be with you for him or the past." Then, she returned to her indifferent attitude. "You know you can't force me." Lanyu stared at her and leaned back. "Have you made up your mind?" She didn't say anything, but just smiled. Lanyu got up gently and patted his clothes. "Chun-chun, if you don't want to, then I'll have to rob you." Then he walked out. After a few days, Chun understood what he meant. She had experienced for herself how powerful the Great U group was now. It had only been a few days, but Mo had already reminded her a few times to not ruin her relationship with Lanyu, both in the open and in the shadows. As Chun brewed the coffee, he quietly said, "Didn't you ask me to heat up Jingyu a little? But I didn't ask you to heat him up. Look at his current titles. Male Mistress, Gigolo, Little Wolf Dog." Mo frowned. "Chun, if you let Lanyu suppress you like this, the company's investment in paging you will be in vain. Then burn him up. It's not like you can't afford it anyway." Chun said indifferently. Mo sighed. "But he's the male lead of He Huan's next movie." Chun snorted. "I knew it. That's the main point. But brother, what happened to you and He Huan? You've been married for so many years. She's always out, and you've only seen her a few times. Did you guys divorce?" "Nonsense." Mo didn't want to talk more, so he hung up. Not only him, but Paging Yu also came over and squeezed into Chun's apartment. Chun took him in, but when Paging Yu went in and out of her apartment, he was photographed by reporters. At that time, he was wearing a bathrobe and slippers on his feet when he threw the garbage downstairs. Chun and him were on the hot search list, causing a sensation in the entertainment industry and Weibo for a few days. Chun. "It's useless if I say it. It's useless if Lanyu doesn't admit it." Chun smiled. "Does it matter if I say it? If Lanyu doesn't admit it, then it's useless." "It's useless if I say it. It's useless if Lanyu doesn't admit it." Mo was silent for a moment. "Then why don't you comfort Lanyu and ask him to clarify it? Do you think he's willing to be cuckolded?" Chun sneered. Paging Yu was staying with her temporarily, but they really didn't have anything. Of course, he seduced her a few times on purpose. Chun only found it funny. Mo thought for a moment and decided, "I'll buy the unit downstairs and tell the public that you're staying upstairs." Chapter 30:50. It was a photo of her and Paging Yu together. She was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with Paging Yu hugging her from behind. He had been joking and she had not taken it seriously. She had pushed it away, and there was nothing. But from the looks of the photo, it was really well taken. It was a complete adultery between a man and a woman. Chun looked at the back. There was a phone number written on it. She immediately recognized it as Lanyu's. Damn it. She reached out and dialed Lanyu's number. "What do you want?" On the other side, Lanyu stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, his gaze lowered. "Mrs. Lan, I also want to ask you what you want. You took the photo?" Chen's voice was a little hoarse. "Did you think about Rongyu when you sent it out? Did you think about him when you were living with a wild man?" Lanyu said coldly, I'm giving you two choices now. One is to move back immediately, and I can help you clarify your scandal. Two, I will release the photo and take back Romyu's custody. Qin Shun gritted his teeth. You're despicable. Lan Yu's voice became colder. Talk about despicable? Qin Shun, you can ask your little wolf dog.
He is not as harmless as you think.
The private detective had investigated and found that Qin Shun and paging you were really just sensationalizing things. But what was interesting was that paging you was not simple. He liked Qin Shun, but Qin Shun did not know. This was a premeditated scandal. Qin Shun gritted his teeth. What do you want?
Move back tonight.
Otherwise, I can't guarantee that this photo will not be spread out immediately. Lan Yu's voice was low. Qin Shun hung up the phone. She did not believe that he would dare to do that. But at night, the photos of her and paging you were still everywhere. Paging you was frozen, and Qin Shun could not even step out of the house. Even a company like King Entertainment couldn't handle such big news in the entertainment industry. The next day, Qin Shun found a way to leave the apartment and drove to Lan Yu's office. Along the way, the employees of Grandview Group looked at her with awe. After all, not every woman had the courage to make CEO Lan a cuckold. Qin Shun opened the door to Lan Yu's office.
Bang.
Not only was Lan Yu present, but there were also a few higher-ups. However, everyone was quite tactful. When they saw Qin Shun, they automatically retreated. CEO Lan had to deal with family matters, hee. After the door was closed, Lan Yu quietly walked to the water dispenser and poured a glass of water for her. He asked slowly, have you thought about it? Are you crazy? Qin Shun stood there and looked at him coldly. Really? Lan Yu's eyes were cold. Qin Shun, where did you get the confidence to think that I would tolerate my wife living with another man? Are you satisfied now? Green hats are flying everywhere, and you can't even pick one up. Qin Shun gritted his teeth. Lan Yu put the water on the coffee table in front of her and sat down. Qin Shun hesitated for a long time before she finally sat down. Move back here. I will help you with PR and promise that I will never see him again. Lan Yu squinted his eyes and said, I think you want Romyu to grow up in a normal environment. By the way, I forgot to tell you that I just picked him up from school. If you insist on living with that pretty boy, then my son will go abroad so that he won't be bothered by the rumors.
Lan Yu.
Qin Shun's expression changed. She did not expect him to go this far. She thought that he would have some scruples. Chapter 30:51. Qin Shun glared at him. Lan Yu was still smiling. He leaned over to look at her, his slender fingers gently caressing her cheeks. His voice was a little low. I knew you would agree. Or what? Qin Shun stared into his eyes. Lan Yu smiled faintly. Or you will never see Romyu, no. I should call him Lan Yu. Out of consideration for the child, he decided to call him Romyu for the time being. Also, your little wolf dog will be burnt on the inside and burnt on the outside. He will never be able to work in the entertainment industry, nor will he be by your side all day long. Lan Yu's voice was cold. Qin Shun looked at him. Is this how you repay me for my sacrifice? She didn't ask for anything in return, but she was annoyed by him. She pursed her lips and stared into his eyes. Lan Yu, I am not the Qin Shun I used to be. She saw how she looked when she loved him. Her eyes were full of love when she sat on the piano and looked at the painting. But now she didn't. She only hated him. Maybe she had been a little moved, but now it was all gone. Lan Yu looked at her and knew that she had softened. He said in a low voice, Let's start over, Chun Chun. But I gave you a chance. She smiled bitterly, but didn't say anything else. She turned around and walked out of the office. Lan Yu caught her. Qin Shun paused but didn't look back. She just whispered, As you wish. She didn't care about paging Yu's future, but she could not see Romyu. Lan Yu gently held her in his arms. Her body was a little stiff. He lowered his head to kiss her, and she moved to the side. But Lan Yu didn't let go of her. Instead, he turned her face and kissed her firmly. Wherever she went, he would chase after her. Finally, she ran out of energy and was forced to raise her head to let him kiss her. Lanyu got a little excited from the kiss and carried her to the lounge. To his surprise, Chen didn't resist or struggle and let him hug him. But when he wanted her, she didn't give him a response. She just bit her fist and didn't make a sound. Lanyu couldn't do anything to her, but he couldn't help it either. After being alone for so long, it was only natural that it was intense again and again. Outside, Kevin and Enran looked at each other. The boss's spring had come again. It was just that he did not know how long this spring would last. Lanyu did it until it was dark. When he let go of her, Chen was still lying quietly. He couldn't help but whisper in her ear, "Are you uncomfortable?" Chen didn't say anything. She was a little tired, so she turned sideways and closed her eyes. Lanyu didn't know what to do with her, so he propped himself up and exhaled happily. His fully healed body seemed to be in much better spirits, sweeping away the gloominess from before. But he was still empty, for she did not seem satisfied. Lanyu hesitated for a moment and whispered in her ear, "Can I do it a little longer?" If she still wanted, he could do it twice more. But Chen didn't say anything. She fell asleep. Lanyu looked at her quietly for a long time and slowly let go of her. He had a particularly helpless feeling, as if this marriage was even worse than the last time. He and Chen were getting worse and worse. He clearly wanted to love her, but he made her angry and disappointed again and again. He knew that she would hate him and blame him, but he couldn't care less. His desire to keep her was so strong. As long as he kept her, she would fall in love with him again. He hoped that she could remember everything, but he was afraid that she would remember. Chapter 3052. When Chen woke up, she had already returned to the villa. She opened her eyes and looked at everything around her, blinking her eyes. Lanyu walked over from the window and said, "What do you want to eat?" Only then did Chen realize that she seemed to have slept for the whole afternoon. She sat up and looked at the night sky outside. She asked him, "Where's Romeo?" Lanyu said quietly, "We'll bring him back after the wedding." His fingers gently stroked her delicate face. "Then you'll become Mrs. Lawn, the unique Mrs. Lawn." He wanted to pamper her in the palm of his hand, but the premise was that she stayed by his side. Chen stared at him for a long time before she smiled. The unique. He was a little annoyed because there was some sarcasm in her tone. Chen didn't say anything else. She just lowered her head and said, "When is the wedding?" "Next week." Lanyu held her chin. "You don't have to do anything. Kevin has already done everything. You just need to try on the wedding dress." "No need. I'll tell you the size. Just pick one." Chen didn't seem very enthusiastic. Lanyu frowned. "Chen? I was married once, to Ronglei." Chen looked down and smiled. "It's better to keep a low profile." These two words provoked him. However, Lanyu couldn't get angry, nor could he blame her, because she had done it for him. Although she had forgotten how much she had loved him before. Yes, he was sure that she had loved him before. Romeo's existence proved everything. But she didn't love him anymore. Her eyes were a little empty when she looked at him. Lanyu felt a little empty, but he just lowered his head and kissed her forehead without saying anything. It wasn't important. It wasn't important. What was important was that she came back to him. Lanyu carried her to take a shower, changed into a bathrobe, and carried her downstairs to the sofa in the living room. He looked into her eyes and murmured, "I'm going to cook." Just as she was about to leave, he suddenly hugged her tightly. She pressed her face against his neck and said hoarsely, "Chen, I'm sorry for what happened last time. I was just afraid that you would leave." He closed his eyes. "Yes, I was afraid that you would leave again. I can't live without you anymore." He seemed to be in the mood to express his feelings to her. Chen sat quietly. Her reason told her that if she went against him at this moment, it would absolutely not be good. "Chen, I'll love you." His lips trembled as he pressed them against her soft skin. "Will you love me?" With that, he hugged her tightly. Very hard, very hard. There is a sense of hopeless helplessness. She forgot everything. She hated him. Chin looked down at his dark hair. She could feel his sadness. She slowly reached out and gently touched his hair. Finally, she pressed her face against his head. She murmured, "Lan Yu, it's impossible for a person to only love one person in life. Sometimes when you miss something, you miss it. You can never find that feeling again. I also had feelings for you before, so I was willing to come back from abroad. I admit that everything I did was on a whim, but at that moment, I really had the impulse and intention to give up everything for you. I went to France just to complete the formalities." But he raped her. And then he found a small celebrity to anger her. She didn't care that much about the small celebrity, but she couldn't accept his way. Chapter 3053. However, he couldn't bring himself to be happy at all because she was making do with it. She was willing to do it for Romeo. He knew it very well. However, he was so greedy for her warmth that he hugged her. It was a long-lost feeling. This moment was more exciting than making love with her for the whole afternoon. Lan Yu hugged her for a long time before letting her go, and cooking. Chin asked, "Do you have a piano here?" He looked back at her, then took out his phone from his pocket and made a call. In less than half an hour, a piano was moved from the piano shop. It took some time to adjust it, and it was soon ready to play. Chin sat there and played the piano quietly. Lan Yu finished cooking and put it on the table. He stood far away from her and quietly watched her play the piano. He had a feeling that she was protecting him and putting him in a circle. It was a circle that he couldn't get involved in. He looked at her helplessly, but he didn't want to give up. After a long time, he walked over and put his hand on her shoulder. He whispered, "Play after eating." The piano stopped, and her body was a little stiff. Chin raised his head slightly and said quietly, "Okay." When she turned her head, Lan Yu felt a little heartache. She was neither angry nor happy. He couldn't see her emotions, and she didn't mess with him. However, this made him feel even more empty. The meal was tasteless, so he cleaned up the dishes and found a place to smoke. Chin was still immersed in his own world, and then he realized that she did it on purpose. She used this way to express her dissatisfaction and stop him from approaching. He hugged her from behind and whispered, "You will still be free after marriage. If you want to be a model, you can still go and fly around the world." He was giving in and pleasing her. Chin knew. She was quiet for a while, and then she smiled softly. "Okay." Then she began to play the piano again. She played the song to Alice, which made Chin very angry, but he had no way to vent it. He grabbed her hand, and his expression was not very good. "Are you missing Romeo? It's just a song. You're thinking too much." Chin finally stopped playing. She clenched her fingers and softly said, "I want to sleep." It was close to dawn. Lan Yu frowned but still went upstairs with her. She didn't ask him to sleep with her. He wouldn't agree anyway. After returning to his room, Chin washed his face and sat in front of the dresser to apply some skincare products. In the mirror, she could see that Lan Yu was not asleep. He was only leaning against the headboard in his bathrobe, with a magazine in his hand. He was waiting for her. She couldn't help but wonder, was he still not satisfied after one afternoon? He was already in his 30s, yet he was still so energetic.
It was not a good thing for his wife.
She applied it slowly and delicately. But he was more patient than she was. He kept looking at the magazine, as if it was very interesting. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She walked over, lifted the quilt, and lay down beside him. She whispered, "I don't want it tonight." But as soon as she went up and finished speaking, her body was pressed down. His handsome face was close to her face. "But I want it," she struggled. He didn't let her go even though she was panting. Instead, he grabbed her hand and pressed it on the pillow. When she moved, it was as if she was sending herself to his mouth. Chin was extremely angry and even more unwilling. She struggled like this, and suddenly there was a little red on the pillow. Lanyu was stunned for a moment, and then he let go of her hand. Her hand was bleeding after playing the piano all night. It wasn't a serious injury, but her hand was full of wounds. At that moment, Lanyu felt that those wounds were on his heart. Chapter 3054. He was stunned for a moment. Then he pulled her up, carefully looked at the wound on her hand, and said very softly, "I'll go get the medicine." At this moment, all his anger was gone, and only one thought was that she was injured. Lanyu went to get the medicine, and when he returned to the bedroom, Qin-chen was leaning against the headboard, quietly thinking about something. He stood by the door, and his heart felt like it had been hit hard. He slowly walked in, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at her. "Give me your hand." Qin-chen, on the other hand, obediently gave him his hand. Lanyu's movements were considered gentle, and he gently bandaged both of her hands. He looked at her face silently and said softly, "You're already so old, yet you still hurt yourself. The guqin is there, you can play it whenever you want," he said as he reached out to touch her hair. Qin-chen bit her lip, didn't say anything, and lay down quietly. Lanyu quietly looked at her for a while, then put away the medicine box. When he came back, he lay beside her and didn't touch her again, just hugged her, careful not to hurt her hand. He hugged her quietly like this. He buried his face in her hair and said in a low voice, "I'll help you take a bath tomorrow, Qin-chen." Qin-chen, that night passed peacefully, because of her hand injury. The next morning, Lanyu got up and made breakfast for her, and asked her to get up and have breakfast with him. In fact, he didn't have to ask her to get up, since she had to go back to sleep in a while, but he wanted to have the ritual of family life. Qin-chen didn't resist, and did whatever he said. Her indifferent look made him a little dissatisfied, but he didn't know why he was angry. Lanyu finished breakfast, changed the medicine on Qin-chen's hand, and checked it. "It should be fine tomorrow." She didn't say anything, and went upstairs to catch up on sleep. She settled down with a clear conscience, living like a rice worm. Lanyu looked at her with a somewhat deep gaze. After a long time, he got up and walked to the parking lot outside. After getting in the car, he put his hands on the steering wheel, quietly alone for a while, and then drove. When he left the villa, his heart was a little full, because Qin-chen returned here. He went to the company and called back, but Qin-chen was probably sleeping, so he didn't answer. At noon, he directly called home and asked the servant to pick up. The servant picked up, and Lanyu coughed lightly. "Is Madam awake?" The servant immediately said, "Not yet. I went to order lunch, but she said she didn't want to eat." "I got it." Lanyu hung up. Then he looked at the phone in his hand, lost. After that, he looked at the phone in his hand for a while. This time, Qin-chen picked up. He should have woken up. "Why aren't you getting up to eat? Are you acting like a child who needs someone to take care of you?" When Lanyu said this, he didn't even know how gentle he was. On the other side, Qin-chen was a little stiff. "I don't want to eat it." "You don't want to eat, or are you angry?"
He paused.
Qin-chen was silent for a while, and then said in a low voice, "My hand hurts, so I don't want to eat." Lanyu chuckled. "Then I'll come back to feed you, okay?" She thought he was joking, but about half an hour later, Lanyu really came back. The servants at home were a little surprised. Sir usually wouldn't come back at this time. But no matter how surprised they were, they still went to greet him. Lanyu took off his coat and threw it on the sofa. He unbuttoned his cuffs and said, "Is Madam still upstairs?" Chapter 3055. Lanyu paused for a moment and said, "Make 2 delicious dishes. I'll bring them up later." The servant went down with a smile, unable to contain her joy. Mr. Qin looked very happy, like a young man in his 20s. Logically speaking, Mr. Qin wouldn't spoil a woman so much at his age. Besides, Mr. Qin's business was very big, and he didn't have time to coax his wife like a little girl. But Mr. Qin came back. How loving! The servant immediately cooked some side dishes and brought them over, along with 2 bowls of rice. Lanyu carried them upstairs slowly. He went upstairs and put the food in the living room. Then he was stunned, because the woman who said that her hand hurt was playing games on her phone. Lanyu didn't know that Qinshan was playing games. Probably because she was born to be a doctor. Her movements were very sensitive, but he saw his heart twitch. Some kind of throbbing in his body turned into a deeper impulse. But he didn't take action. He just took the phone from her hand and swiped it a few times. "Didn't you say your hand hurt?" Qinshan looked up at him. "Why are you back?" After saying that, she took back his phone. "I'm not done playing games yet. Time to eat." Lanyu directly confiscated her phone and put it in his pocket. He walked towards the living room and said lightly, "If my hand is healed, does it mean that I can?" Qinshan immediately got up. "I'm eating." Lanyu, who was walking in front, smiled slightly and sat down on the sofa in the living room. He sat down with his hand on his tie and looked up at her. Qinshan sat opposite him and looked at the dishes in front of him in a daze. "You don't like it?" Lanyu ate elegantly. Qinshan smiled and deliberately disagreed with him. "Well, I don't want to eat it. I want to eat what you cook." She did it on purpose, deliberately making things difficult for him. She wanted him to make her unbearable. It would be best if they didn't get married. There was no need to hold a wedding and immediately kick her out. Lanyu ate halfway, wiped his lips, and said indifferently, "I'll go cook for you." But when he got up, he pulled her up with him. Qinshan was naturally unwilling. He looked at her and said, "You can still play games in the small restaurant." He could cook, but he wanted her by his side. Qinshan pursed his lips and didn't say anything in the end. He just took out his phone from his pocket. When he picked up his phone, he accidentally touched something he shouldn't have. Lanyu tilted his head and looked at her meaningfully. "You want it?"
No.
She raised her phone. "I accidentally touched it." He smiled and held her hand as they went downstairs. He ordered the servants to clean up the leftovers. Qinshan was playing games at the dining table while Lanyu was cooking. As he chopped vegetables and listened to the sound of her playing the game, he felt a little happy. Blissfully. He finally had the life he had yearned for a long time. He didn't care whether she and Rollercoasters were real husband and wife or not. Rollercoasters was dead, and she forgot everything. He didn't want to remind her of the painful memories, so he didn't care. As Lanyu thought about it, he accidentally cut his hand. The wound wasn't big, but there was some blood. He wiped it with a tissue and didn't say anything. He quietly continued to cut vegetables. Qinshan looked up at him. She saw him bleeding. "You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.